Hey there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. My name is David Tran, and I'm one of your co-hosts of this show. I'm also a co-founder of Xfusion.io, a customer support agency, and I'm really excited to be joined by Archil Cheishvili, and he's the CEO of GenesisAI, an AI API marketplace that's aiming to be the Amazon for AI solutions. Thanks for joining the show, Archil.
Thank you, David. Excited for the show.
So you have a background in economics. How'd you go from economics into building AI marketplaces?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So my interest in AI was sparked when I was working at Bridgewater Associates, largest hedge fund in the world. So there I found how company was experimenting with using different machine learning techniques to understand what's happening in the markets. And this team was supposedly, very secretive, but supposedly providing biggest contribution to the Bridgewater's investment machine. And so that was how I got started into AI, tried to understand more about how power of AI can be used to change lots of different things. And I took some classes, and I ended up working on my first AI startup after graduation. And now I'm working on my second AI startup, which hopefully will be the last one, but we're going to see. Yeah.
How'd you get the idea to start the business with? Like, how did you come across this pain point yourself, or how did you interview others who had this pain point?
For sure. So for Genesis, we discovered the pain point when me and some of my current team members have been working on a previous startup, Palatine Analytics, which was also in the AI space. So we discovered the biggest problem in the AI space. There are so many AI tools that are operating and developed in closed environment. There's really no connectivity among these AI tools. And people are reinventing the wheel hundreds of times. For example, you will see hundreds of speech recognition or natural language processing tools out there in the internet, right? So we decided to change it by building in platforms that gathers and brings together all these AI tools, interconnects them to increase their functionality and quality, and allows anyone in the world, no matter how much AI talent they have or not, to be able to use AI so that they can increase effectiveness of whatever they are maximizing.
So when you think of marketplaces, you think of like two sides of the marketplace. Which side did you want to start on first?
That's a really good question. So it has been a challenge, right, to sort of boost the supply side when there are not enough users, and boost the user side when there are not enough suppliers. So the way we try to fight this issue or solve this chicken and egg problem was by deploying and building some of these AI solutions ourselves. So we boosted supply side that ended up as getting more users. And now we are working very actively on getting in more suppliers. We deploy a few supplier solutions. We have pretty good engagement there, but goal is really to start to have this marketplace sort of grow very, very organically without, us reaching out to some of our friends or personal connections.
And how did you meet your co-founder?
So we met in school. So I was at Harvard College, class of 2016. He finished school last year in 2020. We also worked on our previous startup together, and it has been a great journey so far. We are very compatible in terms of culture, company culture, but we are also pretty different in terms of strengths and weaknesses that we have.
So if there are like students in the audience right now, maybe even some of which either want to go to Harvard or are at Harvard, how would you recommend they vet other students? How would you recommend them to find the path to finding the ideal fit co-founders for themselves?
Yeah, so usually, I guess a few things, right? So the first one is I would try to maximize the amount of data points I have about prospective co-founder, right? So the way you try to do that is by taking classes together or working on side projects or just like a dining hall conversations, hours and hours of, for example, debate or discussing different topics, right? Ideally, you want to, so this is first is data collection. Once you collect data, then question is whether there is a fit or not, right? And best ways to figure that out, there are a few questions I ask. First, do you like each other, right? That's the most important thing. There's fundamental, no strong attractions, and there's just a matter of time before the relationship breaks down. Second part is, so first one is more sort of feelings related. Second part is more very practical and logical, which is, do you think you have compatible strengths and weaknesses, right? You really don't need two crazy sales guy and zero engineers, right? Ideally, you want, for example, one business development and one engineer. And so compatible strengths and weaknesses, I would really recommend to be super honest with what your strengths and weaknesses actually are. Most people never want to talk about their weaknesses, and if someone points them out, for example, can I give you feedback? It seems for me that you are not very much detail-oriented and organized and reliable, so they usually hate that. Instead of embracing it and saying that, okay, now I know what my weakness is, and that's the first step to change it. So I'll be very honest with strengths and weaknesses, make sure it's compatible. Being comfortable that everyone has fundamental flaws, like if I told to everyone in this world what are my fundamental flaws, probably no one wants to do anything with me, but but truth is everyone has it, so there's no one who doesn't have fundamental flaw, and the goal is just to get to know what those flaws are, right? So that together you can compensate for each other's weaknesses. But it's another important thing, and the last, just responsibilities, right? Who will be doing what? For example, I found that so when before high school, I was working on a few startups, businesses that were very much purely business driven. There was not much technology, and I experimented doing this with few of my other fellow business friends, and they were similar to me, very leadership oriented. They liked to take charge, command, get things done, and so on. And when you have two exact people doing basically exact same thing, it actually doesn't work. In most cases, it doesn't work. So you can have two, for example, very much leader type people working together if they have clear division of who is doing what, right? For example, one co-founder is doing business development, another is doing tech, and if something happens when there is absolutely full disagreement, there also needs to be clear clarity about who is going to make the decision. So I would really recommend having those tough conversations in early days versus when it's too late to get those conversations.
Maybe I'm the crazy one, but I actually really appreciate it when you get to know someone at a level where you know their strengths and weaknesses like fairly quickly, and they're very self-aware about it. Because I feel like, at least in my opinion, you know what you're getting into, and assuming you are at least willing to reciprocate, they know what they're getting into. And I feel like when all the cards are on the table, I think that's when a lot of trust is built in like a short period of time.
Exactly. That's such a great point, and it's really bad that most people are not willing to let's basically be honest, right? This is all about being honest. I would argue that not saying things the way they are is not too far away from having lack of integrity, So I really am a big believer on being very honest, being very direct, saying things the way they are, and speaking whatever you are thinking about. For me, that's the definition of integrity versus not disclosing, not saying, or talking behind the back of another person, right?
Where do you think that comes from, at least in yourself?
So in my case, I really like to think about second order consequences of anything, right? For instance, let's say that I'm being told that I'm not a very flexible guy, and I'm not very agile, blah blah blah, right? So my first order consequences, I experience some sort of a pain, right? I start to reflect, if I'm not flexible, then how can I be successful in entrepreneur, blah, blah, blah. A second order consequence is, if I realize what my true weakness is, maybe I'll be able to change it. Or if I'm not able to change it, I might find someone who is, let's say, much more flexible than me, work with this person. So as a whole, we actually don't have weakness or flexibility. But most people only think about first order consequence, right? or another thing is they care really too much about another person's feelings. For instance, that's why they never tell another person, for example, can I give you this feedback? Maybe it's good if you change that. So anything extreme in life is bad, right? So I would argue you are caring too much about another person's feelings at a degree that you are not able to see second-order consequence of what's going to happen if you tell another person the truth. I think that's really bad. So
when I was a kid, so my parents are immigrants from Vietnam, and I think the way they were raised and their parents were raised, and as far as they can remember back, the way children are generally raised in their time of history and before was through tough love. And I guess that's the only way they know how to parent. So that's the way I received parenting. And I think it's one of those things where kids don't understand the value of tough love. But now that I'm an adult, I don't have any kids. I'm not even in a relationship. But I feel like I really appreciate tough love, even within like my friendships. When someone, I think, cares about me enough to want to see me grow personally, professionally, financially, spiritually, etc., that they're willing to point out my weaknesses and be like, hey, if you aren't aware, David, like, these are some things I've noticed about you, and I want you to be a better person. And I think that these are some of the things you should consider as a part of being like more holistically well-rounded. And I'm really thankful for those conversations, because at some level that individual is putting our relationship on the line because they want me to be better. And I think that's actually a really rare trait.
That's right. It's so rare for people to start thinking about this. It's actually good for them, right? Because in general, it requires, I would say, I don't want to talk bad about anyone, but it really requires sort of second, higher level of thinking, to be able to see, for example, that what might be second order. For example, let's say I want to eat ice cream, right? So my first instinct is to go and eat it and consume and meet my desires, right? My second order thinking is, if I eat ice cream, that might increase my weight, or that might worsen my teeth, or whatever consequences it has when you eat too much ice cream, right? And third order consequences, even more complicated, right? It might be something like what happens when you don't satisfy your desires, right? So in the short term, right, maybe 3 years from now, it might be good, but in the long term, it might actually be bad. Who knows, right? So people who are really not able to take feedback, I would say, are ones who have sort of more of a, let's say, instinct type part of their brain developed, versus people who are more strategic and I would say more of a rationalist. They are able to really think about and slow down and say, okay, this is painful, but in the future it's good. So overall, it's going to be good for me.
I noticed that in the community of people who like love exercise, they are very like, I feel like that translates into a lot of other areas of life where they realize like, oh, it's uncomfortable. I hate running. I'm pretty sure many people hate running. People love ice cream. And I think if we just lived off our base desires, we eat ice cream and never run. But yes. I think even like young children start to realize like, oh, you get stomach aches if you only do ice cream, and you get fat if you never exercise. And it's an interesting balance. It's always playing in your head.
That's right. And I'm speaking of sports in general. So I think it's so important even in this age. And I think that no matter how old a person is, to be able to be playing some sort of a competition, sports type competition, some sort of tournament. Because, for instance, I got very much into tennis recently, and I have been playing a few tournaments. And this is the first time I'm playing some sort of tournament since high school and college, I guess. And I learned just so much about myself. It really has been transformational for me, because there are sort of constrained environments, right? For example, success is measurable. If you win, you're succeeding, at least in the short term, right? And also rules are measurable. Similarly, how in life there are rules where it's really hard for you to, for example, defy the law of gravity, right? If you try, you're probably going to break something, right? Or even more. So sports really gives you an ability to observe yourself, how you perform and act when there are in sort of constrained environments, right? So, for instance, I found that when I'm actually thinking less about winning and more about just let me enjoy and grow and learn, I succeed more. So I guess similarly, if people were playing some sort of sports, it would be easier for them to realize that it's actually good for them when they are learning about themselves, right? For instance, if you realize that you are really bad with endurance, this is not bad to realize. It's really, really good for you, right? As it's in no way different from thinking that, oh, I'm not flexible, I need to get flexible and let me do something about it.
One of the things I love is that there's some journeys where there's no end, or the end is actually kind of irrelevant. And I think, for example, weightlifting is the first thing that comes to mind, in the sense that like at some point you hit your physical limits, but most people, call it 99.9% of the people, will never hit their physical limits. And unless you're in that 0.1% of Olympians, or whatever the percentages is, there's always more you can be like pushing your body, and it's never a never-ending process. And it's always one of those things where if you take a break, you get slightly weaker, and you have to like constantly maintain it. And I think it builds discipline.
Yes, that's a great point. And also interesting question is, with weight, most people I know, they do weight lifts mostly for sort of looks reasons or for health reasons, right? I would say maybe 10% of people really enjoy the weightlifting, right? And then the question becomes, there's a specific amount of time that it takes for you to weightlift, for you to really start enjoying it and for it to become enjoyable. Or if you don't enjoy in the beginning, you might be like that forever, right? And what was your experience with that?
I'm definitely in the category of the 80-20 principle. I probably put in about 3 to 4 hours of lifting per week and probably like 2 hours of running per week, which I feel like it's not like Olympian at any level, but it's sustainable. It's like a little over about 45 minutes a day. And I met a friend recently actually who's the type that loves lifting 6 days a week, 2.5 hours minimum each time. The dude's fully muscle, barely any fat in his body. And I don't think he even cares about his looks. He just cares about the enjoyment of the process. And I think that change of mind is really what separates people who really excel at something versus people who just like put in enough energy to get like the good enough benefits, which I consider myself in. And I imagine the same thing applies to like work, right? Like I think entrepreneurship is really interesting because it's really difficult to build a business with only like 20% of your effort. You have to be either super brilliant or have some connection or some extremely powerful competitive edge for you to play the game of business with only 20% of your peak energy, hoping to get 80% of the peak rewards, just because there's like a power law at play where I think it's kind of like similar to the world of artists, right? I think most artists are obscure, most artists are dead, but the artists who make tons of money, everyone looks at them and thinks like, oh man, Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, I don't know, like all these rappers, they make so much money, but in the reality, there's so many of other rappers you've never heard of. And I'm pretty sure there's even more entrepreneurs you've never heard of, especially when you think about how like business failure rate in America is like north of 80%.
Yes, that's a great point. I think people really start to truly excel when they do something they are passionate about. And, lots of people say this, but this is 100% true. For instance, when I was playing basketball, I was never really truly passionate about, so I was like very mediocre in basketball. But with tennis, I have been so much into it that, I can play every day. I can sometimes play for a few hours. And I enjoy every moment. It's been really good for me because not only I'm getting sort of benefits in terms of like health-wise and also looks-wise and blah, 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 but also I sometimes end up winning some of the tournaments, for instance, right? And it's been really good. And I think first step to realize what you are truly passionate about is also to realize what you are at some degree good at or not good at, right? In some cases, there is strong correlation between what you are good at and what you will be interested in, right? For example, but yes, that's a long conversation, but I think sometimes people sort of avoid dealing with realities. There are some things they might actually never be good at. For example, I would probably never made in NBA just because I'm like 6'2", and there's only maybe like 0.01% of people who are around 6'2" or around that, right? So even though I might have been super passionate about it, I would still never have made it. So I think it's really important for us to deal with realities on what we are capable of doing and what we are not.
It's funny that you mentioned the fact that you're 6'2", because in my opinion, 6'2" is my ideal height. And so I'm currently 5'10", and I feel like those 4 inches make all the difference. That said, I'm now 28, turning 29 in 4 months. I feel like my growing days are over.
Yeah.
So how do you have the opportunity to have these sorts of conversations with people who are, I guess, very self-aware about their strengths and weaknesses as you build? Because the early stage team of every startup is super important. They're the earliest. They define the trajectory. They define the culture.
Yes.
What do you look for when you hire people?
Yeah, so when I'm hiring people, I look for a few things. So first one is sort of cultural fit, right? So I will look for specifically people who are very open-minded, people who are receptive to criticism, because lots of people think that feedback is same as criticism, but so just like perception of, oh, it's okay for me to be told that I'm not good at something, So that's the second thing. Third is someone who really speaks his mind. There is nothing more difficult than dealing with a person who does not say what he actually thinks or never says anything right. It's so hard to understand people who never complain, never tell you why this is a problem with that. They end up, for example, leaving your company and you have absolutely no idea why they left your company, right? So someone who always speaks up his mind and is honest and direct, this has been super important. Also to nurture great relationships and company culture fit. And last thing I would say is a person who is really not defensive and person who can put ego aside during discussions, because many times we realize we are wrong in something, but we never acknowledge it because we have this big ego, right? And that results in lots of time wasted and people not being able to agree on the truth. There's also a few things, but if I was summarizing everything in one sentence, it's probably this idea of truth at all costs. And the second thing I'm looking for is sort of technical abilities, or I guess if it's a business role, just like good business abilities. And that's when it comes to judging that, I usually talk about, just discuss some of the ideas. For example, on the business side, I really like to discuss general topics, for example, whether abortion should be illegal or whether immigration should be meritocracy-based, blah, 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 right? So I found that when a person is not really prepared for this type of discussion, you really find out the way he thinks, and it's not as much influenced by how well he prepared for the interview. Because lots of people who are interviewing, they are performing well just because they are great interviewers. They have done it hundreds of times. So I want to choose people who are not the best in terms of preparing for things, but rather people who have great logical reasoning, creativity, and everything else. Because I would say that those things are actually much more important than just preparation. Preparation comes and goes, right? If I'm super motivated to do something, I'm probably going to be prepared. If I'm not, I'm probably not. So this person wants to get a job, so he probably will be prepared. But when actually real job starts, who knows whether he will be prepared or not, because it's hard to judge a person's motivation levels, right?
So if I heard you correctly, you'll ask them controversial questions during your interview just to see how they respond. Exactly.
And for example, like one of my sort of common questions is sort of like, give me one of your contrarian opinions, right? And what the person says really helps me to understand during the debating how open-minded person is, how composed the person is, how he reacts stress, how he reacts challenges, how he takes feedback, how defensive how he or she is, how much he can put the ego aside, and also how well he thinks and communicates, right? Many times I heard some of these things that are really, it's not an argument, it's just some sort of like, I think it should be that way. So it's, basically.
Can you share some examples on contrarian opinions that you've heard in interviews and you also like the answer? Not because you agree, but because they explain their side of the argument well.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a few things I heard. I guess I can mention sort of good example and not so good example. So I think it was probably yesterday. The answer a person brought was he was basically saying that, or a few days ago. So the idea of basically the argument was colleges are sort of a scam. So idea here is we put so much value into going to college. and going to college usually does not really bring any major benefits. This was sort of an argument, right? Which can be a good argument if you really support it well, right? But some of the reasoning behind it was not really good. For good answer for this might be, for example, sort of database, right? For example, you show how much it costs to go to college and then how much benefits you get, whatever can be quantified, right? For example, salary increase, blah, 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 or promotion or whatever, or some things that cannot be quantified, for example, some of the negative or positive externalities that comes with it, right? But most people don't really have data, right? So I guess usually those arguments are put aside. But so this was sort of a quick topic that the person mentioned, yeah.
That is interesting. I feel like that is so different. And I love hearing the different ways that entrepreneurs think and tackle problems, just because I think creativity is just really lacking in the world.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and my another favorite question is also just discussing what's the person's biggest accomplishment, and that's usually, if a person, as I said, 25 years old and he or she really has not done anything, right, and that probably indicates that it's very much likely that nothing fundamental going to happen in next 20 years.
There's that saying, past performance is not indicative of future performance. And while that's like objectively true, I think more often than not, if you just look at like things like the S&P 500 index, as a collective whole, stocks of companies that do well continue to do well. And for sure, there's plenty of arguments that can be made on both sides of the argument, but I feel like in general, I do feel like at some level, at some stage in life, it's not inappropriate to measure someone by their merits, especially if they've had autonomy over how they conducted their time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think, once a person is, I think when a person is like 21 plus, it's probably good enough time to start measuring, right? For example, maybe middle school was really bad, or let's say you grow up in a country that has lots of problems, or you had medical problems, blah, 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 but then another chance came, right, in high school. And then if that didn't go very well, then another chance came, college, right? So if a person missed multiple chances, right, in life, I think that usually on average indicates some sort of fundamental problems. Yeah, you can argue that it all accumulates and people go into downward spiral, right? When you, for example, if you grew up in a bad surrounding environment, you didn't have enough books, that resulted in not having a good education, which resulted in something else, not going in a good high school, which resulted in not going good to college, blah, 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 right? But in most cases, people have many, many chances, and when they cannot or don't use those chances, it indicates some sort of a common denominator problem.
My observation of like people at large off of my, I guess, small sample size of people I've seen in my lifetime is that I think on average, most people just go with the flow, and it might be like nudge a little bit here or nudge a little bit there, but for the most part, they're a function of their environment more so than they think. And I think that's the reason I think the world of startups is so interesting, because it's a bunch of weird people. Like in many ways, startup people are weird. Like the business failure rate is incredibly high, and yet they're like, yep, I'm going to leave my steady job on the great path to a great title and great promotion, whatever, and do this brand new thing with no certainty of success, with people I may or may not have spent significant time with to solve this problem that may or may not be solvable. And I think it's so cool to always get the people. It's a different type of like innovation and creativity that I think the world needs more of.
That's right. Yeah, and contrarian thinking, right? Yeah. Non-conforming attitude, which is so important, because one of the best things that happened in the world was because of people who were not conforming and not accepting current status quo and realities, right?
The example I use a lot with my business partners is the example of this one, I think, medical researcher, I think 150 years ago, amongst the first times when they just were discovering the fact of like bacteria and like understand what bacteria were. How this one doctor would when they just wash their hands between surgeries, the survival rate of them helping mothers give birth was significantly higher for both the child and the mother. And they try to tell other doctors to do it, but they're like, nah, dude, you're just crazy. Like, there's no reason to wash hands. Washing hands is a waste of time, waste of money, whatever. And it was only after his life, he spent his entire life campaigning for that. And it was only after his life was over that he discovered bacteria and viruses and realized, oh, washing your hands makes a significant difference. And now in like hospitals, I feel like I saw my doctor recently, and his hands are like so dry because he's constantly washing them. But thankfully, because one person was weird enough to try to like propagandize an idea he was really passionate about, the world is a significantly better place because of it.
It's a super interesting story, actually. I didn't know about that. How we discovered bacteria. Yeah, interesting.
What's a contrarian opinion that you hold within the world of like business?
That's super interesting. In a business, okay. So, yeah, I would argue that in a business, what is most important to, for example, succeed is, or I would say here's another say, here's a different way I would probably say, because it's probably not going to be as contrarian. I think timing is probably more important than quality of the team and quality of everything else, right? Market size and so on, in terms of determining the success of the company. And I saw this, it's really, hard to compare true reason, because this argument, the ideal should be sort of backed by data. But I really have seen lots of success and failure stories around me. And I found that some of the smartest people around me, they were not able to succeed in an industry because they joined the market later than it was ideal. And some of the people who really were sort of, let's just say, bottom of the class, they were able to succeed just because of timing. And a good example of this was crypto 2017.
I was going to say crypto is the first example that comes to my mind.
Yeah. So it was just insane how timing when you joined, which usually was not really under your control, right?
Yeah.
Because it was really so hard to know whether the markets would go up or go down. Basically, 80% was maybe 80% determinant of whether you succeeded or not, right? Yes, some people can argue that most people who joined very early, they were smartest ones actually.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you can say that, but on average, most people really didn't have any idea and any thesis about the future. They joined the industry, right, because they saw some opportunity, and then they either got timing right or didn't get timing right. And this is the one thing that, which sort of means that we probably should experiment more about starting different companies at different times versus, being stuck on a one company and being super persistent, right? And spending like 20 years on it. So I would say if something is not really working out well, it probably makes sense to jump on starting a new company and even new after versus being stuck 6 years doing something to find product market fit and so on.
Something that you note that I also agree with is the fact like the timing of things is, I think it's probably the most significant factor of anything. Like you named the example of crypto, and I feel like I have no doubt plenty of people out there who've made millions of dollars on crypto, and they probably think of themselves like, oh, I am the greatest investor of all time. But you look at the older investors like the Warren Buffetts, you read their philosophies, you read their investment like theses, and you realize like, oh, their investment theses are never about like some sort of hype cycle. It's always about like what has fundamentally worked, because the fundamentals kind of persist throughout history over long enough periods of time. Whereas I feel like for every Bitcoin millionaire, there's also a sum of people who've lost $1 million or something like that. I don't know how the math exactly plays out, but since there's no inherent backing, like it's kind of a zero-sum game at some level.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And lots of people who made lots of money but also lost after, right? When markets flew up. But some people ended up just like cashing out and so on and succeeding that way. Yeah.
So with the money you've raised for GenesisAI, what is your strategy for how you want to deploy it to grow the company?
Yeah, so far we raised around $5 million. We did our last round of $2.6 million in last summer. We have around 5,000 investors now, so we did a few equity crowdfunding rounds. Our first initial rounds were traditional, angel type investors and small VC type investors, but now we switched completely to equity crowdfunding because we're big believers on the idea of building company biasing people, forcing people, and having both investors and users. In terms of growth and how we use this money and so on, we really care about mostly two things. So the first one is product, and second is business development, right? So on the product side, for instance, we grew products from having 5 different AI models to having around 35 different AI models just in the last few months. We did lots of features. We improved connectivity amongst this AI tools so that there's higher functionality, right? For instance, you can have speech recognition model working with translation model to produce speech translation and so on and on. Moving forward, we really want to increase maybe, go to 200 models in the next few months or a year, and also increase quality of this AI product and services, trying to get to the place where GenesisAI is a platform that has the best AI-related APIs that's out there, better than OpenAI, better than what you find on Hugging Face and other competitors. On the business development side, our most important focus for now have been users, just maximizing number of users, doing lots of user interviews, learning as much from them as possible. And next year, I think it's probably going to start to become more of a generating revenue, see what are some of the tools that people are willing to pay money for and what are some of the not. Still experimental learning, but more about learning through the revenue instead of just usage and engagement.
How do you know who are the right people to interview for their feedback as it relates to an AI marketplace?
Yeah, so now we are focusing on developers. So we are building most of our APIs for developers. Before we were focusing on non-technical people actually, and we found that engagement was substantially higher from developers and some of our sort of power users. And now I spoke to maybe around 25 to 30 developers. This ranges some of our own users and also some of my college friends who are developers. It's just been really helpful in learning what they. Most important thing is really to understand. Only things that probably matters is to understand. Do people perceive what you are doing as, oh, this is something cool, like nice to have, versus whether it's going to solve a real fundamental problem and pain point, right? Because when people tell you, oh, it's cool, it's a good idea, that means that it's going to be really hard to sell and acquire users. So, yes, that's okay. Some people have a very high cost of user acquisition, and at some point they turn profitable, but it's going to be very, very bumpy road. But when you are hearing something like, oh, this is going to change what I do completely, or change my life or something, right? It usually rarely happens. Then you know that you probably have a product market fit, right? But yes, so I'm really always looking to see if I'm gonna hear something like this fundamentally just transformational for me and so on and on. If I'm not hearing that, then I usually try to experiment as much as I can before I narrow down on a specific focus.
Are you concerned that the user and the buyer could be different? For example, if the developers of a startup, they probably are the buyer, but once you start targeting larger companies, the user is the developer, but the buyer is some person in the finance team who has to figure out what is the ROI of this platform.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to be honest, David's probably right. Yes, I think that's probably what's going to be. But our approach is, if we build a product that's really good for developers who collectively have a power to convince VP of engineer, for example, to start using a solution or not start using a solution, in the end, we still get what we want, which is, for instance, companies starting using our solution, right? Because, for instance, we have, let's say, a team of around 10 people now. So if all of my team members are telling me, oh, let's start using Slack, it's really good, right? I'm probably going to say, okay, let's start using it, even if I don't want, or even if it doesn't solve a problem for myself, right? So we believe in the sort of collective power of developers, and let's see whether we're going to get benefits from that or not.
Okay. So you are the first guest ever had on the show coming from Harvard. And I've never actually been to Harvard, but some lecturers from Harvard came to Uber to give a mini series on leadership and teamwork. What were some your experiences from Harvard, and what were some some of your favorite experiences with the academic side of it?
Academic side of it. So there was a few. So my first experience was a freshman fall semester. I was taking, everyone is required to take this writing class basically, and it was structured in a way that it was discussion based. And I've never been to the US, and so my first few weeks of being here, so during discussions I was very direct, I was very vocal in terms of I was speaking my mind. Even if teachers said something I don't agree, I usually try to sort of refute the argument or whatever. And so that was happening, and then I submitted my first paper, and I got the worst score I ever gotten in my life. And I thought that I deserved not so good score, but I think there was a huge gap on the score I deserve and how much I should have gotten. And then I realized that this person who was teaching me was super sort of biased against people who did not agree with her. So that was sort of a tough realization for me. But I needed to balance my idealistic approach of what I want to be true with what's reality, right? And reality is that some people really don't like when you are sort of contradicting what they say. And if you want to get good grades, you might need to sort of play according to their rules. So that was one tough realization. But that's more on the sort of funny and relatively negative side.
I really hope that's not your favorite memory.
When it comes to positive sides, there are so many. I was like 99% positive, just like how it really changed my life, especially for me, because I came from a very small country, from Republic of Georgia, Eastern Europe, where education system was not even comparable to US. So how it really gave me everything, more like 90% of what I have, and I'm very much grateful. And especially on the academia side, I think there are a few major things. So first one was just the environment, this very type of environment where everyone is extremely motivated to reach their full potential when it comes to understanding what you want, understanding who you are, and just like maximizing your strengths and eradicate your weaknesses. It was the biggest one. And second was just intellectual environment that was really perfect for me in terms of talking about anything that interested me with one of the smartest people in the world, and working with those people to do great things, learning from them. So those were incredible for me. And third and last, I would say, was just big trust I had in school. For instance, if I'm being taught about economics by someone who I don't trust enough, I might not be as motivated to learn about economics versus someone who I know that if I listen to this guy, I might literally become Nobel Prize winner in economics. 100 years from now, 30 years from now, right? So the trust was actually pretty important motivation-wise, In my high school, for example, most people really didn't study, and one reason why they didn't study was because they did not believe that what teachers were teaching them were actually, something that will be useful for them, because they saw that teachers actually don't know anything about anything, So this belief was actually pretty important.
How'd you go from being a student to being an entrepreneur who was able to get some of your past academic connections through your professors, through your deans, etc., to be advisors for your company?
Yeah, so it actually has been much easier than I expected, because when I was in school, I don't think I have not had a sort of one-on-one lunch or dinner with a professor for like 2-3 years. I only did it in last third or fourth year, and most of our students don't. They really don't have one-on-one interaction with their professors, because professors are perceived as some sort of kings or gods, who are roam around the campus with their wisdom, and someone who is untouchable and so on. But once I became an entrepreneur, I realized that actually they really like when you ask them for advice. They really like to help their students out, because most of them are at a stage of their life where they care more about giving back versus, their own success and spending time just with themselves, I guess that has some degree has to do with age, right? People who are about 55, 60, and large majority are that age. In academia, they care more about giving back. So I had really great and easy time in terms of getting one of the best advisors in computer science, both from Harvard and MIT, and I'm very grateful for the help they providing. And my advice to every student will be just send every email you can and knock every door you can, and you will definitely be able to get a great advisors, and they're really helpful both in terms of giving advice and also in terms of how legit the company looks like.
So I don't have a clear breakdown on the demographics of the viewers in the show, but if I had to guess, they're probably in the range of like 25 to 36. And I think if you're no longer in school, the same system still applies after school. So I've actually like messaged a ton of people through LinkedIn just to ask them for like their insights on various problems or if they're open to mentoring. And you'd be surprised how many people reply back. And it doesn't, not every conversation needs to go anywhere, but you learn a lot from those interactions that didn't necessarily cost you much other than a quick message.
That's right. And I found that biggest benefit from advisors is mostly on the connection side and not necessarily about technical advice they can give you, because most of them cannot spend enough time to really learn fundamentally what you are doing. But they have lots of connections when it comes to PhD you want to hire, or an investor you want to get connected, or another person, right? So the connections, and it's something that they can easily make. So advisor has been very helpful with connections.
Something I remember hearing from the lecturers who came from Harvard was the fact that Harvard actually pays below market wages to their professors and their staff, primarily because they don't want it to be the place where everyone goes to end their career just because they want the money. And it's like an intentional filter to get the people who are truly passionate about education, advancing society, and giving back to the world in those positions. And I think that's just a cool philosophy.
Yeah, super interesting.
I feel like I don't know if like there's ever like an age that's like too late to go back to school, but at some point in my life, I would love to go visit Harvard as an actual student and just like attend classes and see what life is like there. Because I feel like a lot of my friends who have graduated from Harvard feel like it was an experience like nothing else, including the people who went to both Stanford and Harvard, or MIT and Harvard, or Berkeley and Harvard, whatever. Like every combination, everyone just loved Harvard. So cool to hear.
Yeah. It's really, the school asks you, so much from you, and it gives you so much also. I think it's sort of one very unique relationship where it's all about giving to each other, and more you invested you become, more you love the place, and more it also loves you back. And it's really one of the best relationships. I hate when some of my college friends, they criticize Harvard and they talk about, it's bad because of X, Y, Z, and so on. I think most people don't realize how much their school does for them, in terms of changing their life. So I think we should be really grateful for most of it, yes.
I agree. Just to add on one last thing on the topic, I think you mentioned a lot of the professors being in the age range of called like 55 plus. And I think they've reached that point academically where they've done everything they wanted. They probably accumulate enough wealth to retire. I think I've also noticed the same thing amongst entrepreneurs, except like significantly earlier, especially if they had an exit. I think people who have had an exit, there's just so much money flooded in the VC world nowadays that if you had like even just a few rounds of funding and an acquisition, even if you weren't necessarily like a co-founder of your employee number like 1 through 5, it's easy to walk away with like 10 million plus in liquid net worth. And for most people, that's enough to live the rest of their lives doing whatever the heck they wanted, unless they have an addiction to buying like private jets. And those people also like love the space, obviously, because they've spent time as like an early employee, and those people love giving back as well.
Yes, exactly. And I guess that's also one big benefit of entrepreneurship, right? People can make sometimes, those big like $10, 10 million, 20 million bucks. It's a very young age. And you think about if you invest 20 million at the age of 30, by age you are 65, 70, you actually will be almost a billionaire, so just about. But compare that to some places like consulting or finance, where people, or even medical doctors, they start to make lots of money when they are 35 plus, 40, right, 45. And just because of that, they end up actually making a lot less than entrepreneurs who might succeed in the early ages. So I'm not saying that entrepreneurship is the best way to make lots of money, but if you are more passionate about entrepreneurship than finance, for example, and you go in finance because of money, I think that's a wrong decision.
I've yet to meet many investment bankers who tell me that they love their job. Like the nature of the job, not the perks of the job. Everyone loves the perks of the job.
Yes, yes. The same thing with consulting, right? And yeah, sales, yeah.
In the interest of time, I know you have a meeting after this. I just want to ask you one last question. What's something you've been learning recently that you wish you knew a long time ago?
So I'm reading this book. It's called Father and the Monk. So it's about. At some degree, it's mostly about Buddhism, but in reality, it's mostly about Stoicism, actually. And I knew a little bit about Stoicism, but I relearned about it, and it's been transformational for me. So the idea is that in order for us to maximize our happiness, we should start to care more about things that are under our control, for example, discipline, self-growth, learning, and not care about things that are not, for instance, winning or money or succeeding and so on, right? So this has been a great way for me to just like be commonly okay when something doesn't go the way I want it to go, For example, if I don't get X number of users by Y date or other stuff, something that are not under my full control, I'm much okay to say, okay, this is okay, just move on and do, try a different way of boosting the user numbers and so on, right? It's just like really increased my happiness. And I started reading it, like I said, 2 weeks ago, so I'm still sort of trying to fully internalize this in my life, but I would say that 99% of our happiness is all mental, all in our head. It's all about how we think about different things, and it's completely. It's just like completely surprising for me is that even schools spend so much time about training our mind in a way that we learn about different things. For example, math or science and so on, but much less about teaching us how to control our mind and our thoughts, right? I think that's actually much more important for happiness and learning science. And we know so many scientists who are completely unhappy, right? So I think this is one. If I was, for instance, managing a school, I would definitely allocate maybe 20% of time on just mindfulness and teaching people how to control their emotions and thoughts.
I can't remember if it's a Buddhist saying or not, but it roughly translates to something along the lines of, there are no external problems, there are only internal ones. And I think about that quote a lot. I don't necessarily identify as a Buddhist, but I think there's a lot of Buddhist things that just make me think.
Yes.
That's one of them, yeah.
Yes.
Anyways, thank you for your time. I'd like to give you the stage now for anyone who wants to follow you along in your journey or follow your company on social media or like professionally. What's the best way for them to do so?
Yes, so GenesisAI.io website, we have all the social media links and so on that allow for people to subscribe and follow our journey to use power of AI to do lots of things. And I really appreciate David. This was absolutely great.
It's been a great pleasure for me too.
Yes, amazing discussion. I'm looking forward to continue our conversations.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.